Hey everyone, let's do a quick little tour of the Etruscans in early Rome. So the Bronze Age came to an end kind of late in the Italian peninsula, only in the 8th century BCE. And there are lots of theories about where the Etruscans may have come from originally, but most likely it seems that they've come from the area of Asia Minor, which is kind of modern day Turkey, and they settled in the area between Florence and Rome, which today is called Tuscany. And you can see this area highlighted in your textbook on map 5.1. That's page 105 of the newest version of the book. So we don't have much literature from them, mostly just funerary inscriptions. Roman works indicate that they did have a rich literary tradition, we just don't have access to any of it. We know about the Etruscans mainly through their tombs. The Romans did not destroy these tombs when they conquered the Etruscans. And similar to people throughout Europe, the Etruscans were buried in pottery vessels or urns and placed in the pit with the belongings they would need in the afterlife. So here's a couple of examples of an urn. The head would have come off and the ashes would have been inside. Or sometimes they looked like this hut, and again the ashes would be inside of there. And they were placed inside of these tombs, kind of built in stone and then covered with like domes of earth. So you have each one of these would have been an individual tomb or a family tomb, probably more likely. And the insides would sometimes look like, this is the tomb of Atreus in Greece, but this kind of corbelling that's done, that's what this brickwork is called, corbelling. A lot of the Etruscan tombs would have looked similar to this. And later on, they built the insides of the tomb to look more like houses, where the buried person would have access to all the things they would need in the afterlife, pots and pans, and etc. All right. So we don't know much about the ideas that they had about the afterlife. We have a lot of sarcophagi, lids for sarcophagi. Sarcophagus, of course, would have been under here, and that's where the person would have been buried, right? The body would have been in there, kind of like a coffin. We'll look at images of early Christian sarcophagi later and look at all the carvings on them. But these images would have been carved on a stone and gone on the lid of the sarcophagus. And here we have a couple reclining, getting ready for a feast, right? This is how people in the ancient Rome had their feast. They weren't sitting up at the table, they were sort of half reclining like this. And you can still see sort of the archaic smile on these folks' faces. Apparently later on, the afterlife became a little more complex, and it doesn't look like it's always a happy place. We see, get rid of my grid lines here, I didn't mean to leave those. There we go. So we see sometimes the demon of death sitting up on the couch with the reclining person, and sometimes carved in the side. We don't have a lot left of Etruscan architecture. We know that the foundations were made of stone, but the rest was mostly wood, so of course that's disappeared over the years. But we can kind of tell the outlines of what the temples would have looked like from the marks in the stone, indicating where the columns and walls would have gone. So you see it's kind of similar to what we saw of the Greek architecture. Again, people wouldn't have been allowed outside. Any worshiping would have done in the courtyard out here in front. But what's different from the Greek temple is that inside the cella, let me show you a cutaway version, the cella where the statue of the deity would have gone, now we have 3 cellas, 3 rooms for the 3 dominant deities, Juno, Jupiter, and Minerva. In Greek, you would probably know them as Hera, Zeus, and Athena. So instead of just having one god or goddess to which the temple was dedicated, there would have been a room for all 3 of them. So that's a little different. We can see they decorated a little differently. There's no carvings and whatnot, but we did have figures up at the top here. So we're familiar with the layout of Roman Roads, we've heard about that, of course. And when they colonized different areas, this is Timgad in Algeria, and I believe you have this image in your text as well. Yeah, 5.4, figure 5.4. Um, you see a theater over here, but you'd have these major thoroughfares, the Decumanus running east and west, and the Cardo running north and south. So the Etruscans sort of were the precursors in city planning. They laid out their cities in this way. We'll look at later images of Rome, where you can see in one little corner of Rome the original Cardo and Decumanus, and then of course the city has grown up all around it. But these planned cities were the start of what we would see when the Romans colonized other areas. They'd bring the city planning idea with them. Another thing the Etruscans were known for is their metalwork. They were very good at making images out of metal, sculptures out of metal. This is the famous she-wolf sculpture. This is the wolf who raised the twins Romulus and Remus, who go on to be founders of Rome in this legendary story. And these two little fellows were added later. It was just the she-wolf by herself, and we think these were added in the Renaissance at some point. But they were known for their metalwork. And finally, they were known for their work in arches. The Greeks knew how to use arches, but they used it just mostly for gateways or underground structures like sewers and that sort of thing. But we see the Romans really take the arch and run with it. And we'll talk more about arches later because they're going to be important to us for the remainder of the semester. But in general, we have these stones, these triangular shaped stones, are called voussoirs. Here's the keystone at the top that holds all these bricks in place without any mortar or anything. And then the force from whatever's on top of this, like let's say there was a building up here or a bridge or whatever, an aqueduct, all that force would come down here, be distributed along the curve of the arch, and go down into these piers, into the ground, into the foundation. The arches, that's a plain arch. If you took that arch and sort of shoved it this way, it'd be called a barrel vault. And then if you had one barrel vault going in one direction and another barrel vault going in this direction, where they would meet in the middle would form this shape, and we call that a groin vault. So a lot of different innovations coming about in the world of arches at this time. And that is it for us.